Hi, everybody. Welcome to English Digest. My name is Tom.
Hi, I'm Stephanie.
It's our News Digest unit, and today we're going to be talking about something called eDNA. Now, I've heard of DNA. That, of course, is some kind of chemical in your body that says a lot about you and kind of determines, if you're going to have red hair or blue eyes or dark skin or whatever, or you're going to be tall or short.
Or be musically gifted or a science genius. All of those things are in our DNA.
All sorts of things like that. But now we've got something called eDNA. And if you see the word E, it always refers to something that has to do with electronics or data or things like that. Like an e-reader, for example, that's a device that will help you read books on a device. And so, what's this all about? eDNA. It's kind of a new concept.
It is a new concept, but this time, instead of being like other little small e's that precede a name of something, telling you it has something to do with digital technology, this E actually stands for environment. So we're going to be talking about the environment and about something that I didn't know anything about before. So let's go ahead and read through today's article, and then we'll be back to talk about what eDNA means.
Teams of scientists around the world have recently demonstrated the viability of airborne and waterborne DNA collection. The methods, which permit the analysis of large samples of soil, air, or water for genetic material, rely on the concept of environmental DNA. This eDNA is found in the innumerable particles of biological matter that creatures shed as they go about their lives. While these tiny scraps are invisible to the naked eye, eDNA tests can reveal a wealth of information for researchers. For example, wildlife managers in the Susquehanna River system in Pennsylvania, U.S., detected Didymosphenia geminata DNA through eDNA testing. This slimy species of algae, often called by the disgusting but apt name of rock snot, disrupts ecosystems to which it is introduced. However, because scientists caught it early, the rock snot was contained to just one area of the river instead of spreading and leading to a wide-ranging ecological breakdown. In another usage of eDNA testing, researchers from the Hong Kong University Conservation Forensics Laboratory tested eDNA collection and analysis methods at a seafood market. They pulled water samples from the drainage systems and identified 144 species, 3 of which were protected at an international level. While vendors may not have wished to answer questions from law enforcement about their wares, the eDNA from their stalls told the university forensics team everything they needed to know. Though it seems like science fiction that a test of the air or water in an environment could tell us so much, it's a widely applicable tool. Even better, the more commonplace this tool becomes, the more uses scientists will find for it.
Okay, guys, let's look at the title, Scanning the Environment with eDNA Testing. If you're scanning something, besides using a scanner, which is a device used to kind of move over something and then get a picture as a result, if you just scan the room, for example, maybe you're reading a book and it said, the man walked into the room and quickly scanned the people who were there, scanned over the people who were there. Just looking quickly around an area is scanning an area. Here we've got some new science that I've never heard of before called eDNA, and they're going to be using it to test different things. We've got teams of scientists around the world, and they've recently demonstrated the viability of airborne and waterborne DNA collection. Viability is a word we use to say that something is actually capable of working successfully. It's possible, it's feasible. Maybe you've got a new business proposition for a client or a customer, and you want to talk about its viability with them. Will it work? Will it not? We think it could be very viable for your company. Viability, of course, is the noun form of viable, which is an adjective. So they have demonstrated or shown that airborne and waterborne DNA is actually possible, that they're actually out there collecting it now.
Right, so airborne means in the air and waterborne means in the water, and you can find DNA in the air and in the water. And the methods which permit the analysis of large samples of soil, air, or water for genetic material rely on the concept of environmental DNA. So again, E there does not mean electronic, it means environmental. And of course, you can find these samples in the soil, in the air, and in the water. And you want to find DNA samples for genetic testing and for genetic material. Genetic means having to do with genes, okay? Genetic material, and of course, in order to get those samples, you need to get them from these various places, and it again is genetic material, and it's the concept of environmental DNA or eDNA.
Ooh, kind of cool, huh? Well, let's look at this. What are they going to be doing? This eDNA is found in the innumerable particles of biological matter. Everything that's alive, that's not man-made, that actually is organic, has a lot of DNA, right? So they're looking at all of these particles in biological matter. Matter is just a word we use for stuff. Matter. Innumerable, though, is our vocabulary term, and it just means too many to count. Wow, very numerous. Too many to count. Countless, you could use the word countless instead. Countless particles or tiny, tiny pieces of something that creatures shed. When you talk about an animal shedding something, they're usually shedding fur or their hair, like a cat sheds their fur or hair all over your clothes and your sofa and your furniture. But you can also, people shed skin, shed dead skin, shed cells of dead skin. So it just comes off their body. You can also use it to talk about taking clothes off, you know. He shed all his clothes and jumped into the lake in his underwear. You could use it that way, too.
You could. And, of course, creatures, cats, dogs, humans, are shedding this biological matter every day as we go about our lives. So you're probably spreading your DNA all over the city as you commute to and from work. Somebody could potentially find your DNA out there. And while these tiny scraps are invisible to the naked eye, eDNA tests can reveal a wealth of information for researchers. So these, of course, are small pieces or scraps of material. A scrap, of course, is a small piece of something. My grandmother used to say that they fed their pet dogs scraps or table scraps. Oh, we never bought dog food or cat food for our pets. We just gave them table scraps, which means leftover food from dinner. And yes, my grandmother thought it was absurd that we went to the grocery store to buy Alpo dog food.
So a scrap officially is just a small piece of something that's left over after the greater portion or part of it has been used. We would use it for food like you did, Tom. We gave our dinner scraps to our dogs, but my mom also used it to talk about material or fabric that was left over after she had sewn a dress or something cute for her kids. Material scraps, I'm going to use the scraps from my last project to make a quilt, put little tiny squares of material together. So scraps are just small pieces of something that are left over. Primarily, it's used for either fabric or for food. So these are tiny scraps, but they're neither food or material, but they're invisible to the naked eye. So you need some scientists if you want to see them. That's how these eDNA tests can reveal a wealth of information. Wealth here just means a ton of information. He has a wealth of knowledge or a wealth of wisdom. He's got a library that contains a wealth of beautiful old books. So wealth sometimes is used as a measure word.
Right, and of course you can't see these with your naked eye, just like you can't see certain stars with your naked eye, so you need a telescope, or as in this case, you probably need a microscope. And of course, if you can find those bits of DNA, they will give you a wealth of information, especially if you're a researcher. Now, here in the next paragraph it says, for example, wildlife managers in the Susquehanna River system in Pennsylvania, U.S., detected Didymosphenia geminata DNA. I hope I said that right. That, of course, is a Latin term. It's a type of DNA, and they found this type of DNA through eDNA testing in the Susquehanna River system.
Well, I was raised saying Susquehanna. I am not from Pennsylvania, but I grew up saying this word because it's part of my history. Susquehanna River. So if you're from Pennsylvania and we've mispronounced your river, I'm sorry.
Well, my uncle lived in Philadelphia, and that's the way he said it. But, of course, Philadelphia is way on the other side of Pennsylvania. So, yeah, you'd probably have to talk to somebody from Pittsburgh to know exactly how this word is pronounced.
And can I say for the record, people from Pittsburgh have their own accent.
Could be, indeed. A friend of mine lived in Pittsburgh for a while. But in any case here, it's a river system with streams that flow into this river system. It's kind of a watershed, and they found this DNA, and they used eDNA testing. And we'll continue talking about this very fascinating subject in just a couple of seconds, but let's take a break right now and listen to our Chinese teacher.
大家好，我是派老师。今天讲解的是夏季刊 Unit 10 Scanning the Environment with eDNA Testing。喜欢看犯罪现场调查影集的同学，对于 DNA 协助犯罪侦查的妙用，应该一点都不陌生。实际上，科学技术不断在突破，现在科学家甚至可以在空气、水当中提取 DNA 做分析。这当中最关键的概念就是 eDNA Environmental DNA 环境 DNA。好，我们现在一起来看看学习重点。请同学看到第一段第一个句子 Teams of scientists around the world have recently demonstrated the viability of airborne and waterborne DNA collection. 请同学特别注意到 recently 这个副词。通常我们看到这个时间副词的时候，要记住要搭配着现在完成式使用。再来，请同学注意到 viability 这个字。viability 是名词，表示可行性，而它的形容词是 viable。V-I-A-B-L-E， 还有一个同义词也请同学特别注意，是 feasible，feasible，F-E-A-S-I-B-L-E。再来，请同学看到第二个句子 the methods 这个句子 the methods 指的是前一句在空气中、水中采集 DNA， 中间两个逗点区隔开来的关系子句是非限定修饰，补充说明这些 DNA 采样方法依赖环境 DNA 的概念。再来，请同学看到第三个句子 This eDNA is found in the innumerable particles 这个句子，请同学特别注意到在句尾的时候有一个 as they go about their lives， 指 they 所指的就是前面的 creatures， 各式各样的生物。生物在平常活动当中，所以的 go about their lives 意思就是生物呢，他们在平常活动的时候，那当然如果对象是人，指的就是我们平常过日子的方式。再来，请同学看到第四个句子 While these tiny scraps 这个句子，请同学把 the naked eye 画起来， the naked eye 指的就是肉眼。再来，请同学看到主要子句的地方eDNA tests can reveal a wealth of information， 请同学把 a wealth of information 画起来， a wealth of 后面加上名词，这里 a wealth of 其实所指的就是大量的，这边 a wealth of information 指的就是大量的资讯。
We're going to take a quick break. Stay tuned. We'll be right back. Welcome back, guys. We're scanning the environment with eDNA testing. We've moved from testing people and animal DNA to now testing DNA that's out there in the environment, which is amazing. I don't know what that's going to lead to. Our world is changing so fast, it's hard to predict anything anymore. So what are they doing? They are actually using methods that permit them to analyze large samples of things like soil, dirt, air, or water for genetic material. Which is interesting. And they found DNA in innumerable particles of biological matter that creatures, like not just little animals, but tiny, tiny bugs and things that maybe our eyes can't even pick up that are invisible to the naked eye, this testing can actually reveal a lot of information to these researchers.
Indeed. So there you go. That is where you get these scraps of information by using eDNA tests, okay? And you can get all sorts of information from those DNA samples. So again, we've got some wildlife managers in the Susquehanna River system in Pennsylvania. And they, of course, detected this DNA strand, Didymosphenia geminata. And again, they used eDNA testing. It's a slimy species of algae, often called by the disgusting but apt name of rock snot. Ooh, snot is the stuff that comes out of your nose. So rock snot doesn't sound like a very flattering name, but it's an apt name. If something's apt, it's appropriate. It's a good name for that thing. So yes, if you could imagine snot on a rock, then that's what this algae would be. Algae's kind of a plant that grows in water.
I wanted to mention, if you go online, I wanted to look this up. I didn't know how to say this Latin term here. And I found out that most everyone just has shortened it to Didymo, and not even with the S, just Didymo.
Okay.
So if you go to YouTube, as I often do for pronunciation help, you'll find some of these scientists who just simply say Didymo. And they'll even entitle it Didymo. They won't use the entire name there. Kind of complicated, let's be honest. Not many of us are good with Latin words or terms like this. The title Rock Snot just makes me laugh because when kids grow up in America and their noses are running and, you know, they kind of wipe their noses without a tissue, it's kind of gross. Snot in general is just gross. So to call it rock snot is really kind of yuck. But if you take a look at this particular algae, it is kind of yucky looking, for me at least. Slimy would refer to something that's really kind of a gross texture. Worms are slimy. Some types of foods are even kind of slimy, like oysters. The reason I don't like oysters is they are slimy. A texture is really important to me. But as Tom said, and the article says too, it's really an apt or appropriate name of rock snot. So you can use that and just have a good time. It disrupts ecosystems to which it is introduced, so it's harmful. However, because scientists caught it early, the rock snot was contained to just one area of the river. And so they were able to keep it in one part instead of letting it spread to other areas and perhaps lead to a ecological breakdown. When you have a breakdown, people have breakdowns, but usually it's a mental breakdown where they kind of lose their mind for a while and they have to, you know, kind of recover and get rid of all the stress in their lives. But a car can have a breakdown when it stops running and you have to pull over to the side of the road. So a breakdown is a collapse of some sort of system. And they're talking about a collapse of the ecological environment around the area.
Right, so of course this was occurring in the Susquehanna River system in Pennsylvania, and they had to keep this species of algae isolated to a single area because if it spread, it could cause all sorts of problems. And you hear about this all the time about introduced species of plants and animals and stuff like that. So, yeah, if they start to spread, they can cause problems. And I did mention that the Susquehanna River is in Pittsburgh. It's actually not. It's in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. Hopefully, you're not going to check your geography too closely on that one. There are different rivers in Pittsburgh. This is Harrisburg we're talking about. Now, moving on to the next paragraph here, it says, in another usage of eDNA testing, researchers from the Hong Kong University Conservation Forensics Laboratory tested eDNA collection and analysis methods at a seafood market. So, of course, this is going on in Hong Kong, and you've got a university with a department in the university, the Hong Kong University Conservation Forensics Laboratory. Okay, so forensics just means they look for clues, like in crime scenes, they look for DNA samples and stuff like that. And so in this particular case, they're looking for DNA samples using eDNA testing, and they went to a seafood market, and of course, they tested various DNA samples there.
They sure did. They pulled water samples from the drainage systems and identified 144 species, 3 of which were protected at an international level, meaning they weren't supposed to have some of these things. I guess they got them illegally. This is a way for the authorities to discover if someone had been obeying the law or disobeying the law. So if you have water samples from the drainage systems, you're talking about the used water usually that goes through the pipes into a sewage system, drainage. A drain just takes the water that you've used and it goes through pipes and then puts it to either be recycled for reuse, cleaned, or dumped forever because it's too dirty. They identified 144 species, and 3 of those were found to be protected at an international level, which is serious for the environmentalists in particular.
Right, so in Hong Kong, of course, they probably try to sell anything. They do say that about people from Guangdong. They eat anything that moves. So they probably are trying to sell endangered species there. They're not supposed to be. So, hey, they found out that there were 3 of those protected species in that seafood market there. So, of course, here it goes on to say, while vendors may not have wished to answer questions from law enforcement about their wares, the eDNA from their stalls told the university forensics team everything they needed to know. Basically, the sentence is saying that, hey, if the police go down there and ask all the vendors what they're selling, of course the vendors aren't going to say, oh, yes, sir, I'm selling an illegal species of snail that I could go to jail for, so yeah, you can arrest me now. Of course they're not going to admit that. No. So, of course, if they use eDNA, they can find out who's selling what in this market. I suppose the vendors in that market will be careful in the future. And of course, if you talk about government organizations that want to enforce the law, you can refer to them as law enforcement agencies. So here we've got enforcement. That is the act of making sure that people obey the laws, and if they don't, you can punish them. Law enforcement, the verb is enforce. A lot of times, of course, we have traffic laws, but sometimes the police don't enforce those laws because the police are just too busy with other more important things.
Now, the vendors didn't want to have questions from the law enforcement officers about their wares. Your wares is a plural word that just means articles that are offered for sale. The eDNA, though, told these law enforcement officers all they needed to know. They didn't have to actually question the vendors. They discovered from forensics that they were selling illegal things. So, though it seems like science fiction that a test of the air or water in an environment could tell us so much, it's a widely applicable tool. Applicable or applicable. They're both correct pronunciations. There are two there that you can choose. Applicable, applicable. Even better, the more commonplace this tool becomes, the more uses scientists will find for it. Now, if something's commonplace, it's quite ordinary. You find it anywhere. It's not too special. It's not unusual. It's very ordinary. Something that is found in lots of different places. So I think we're going to see more and more usages of this eDNA testing in the future.
Yes, and you can imagine what they're going to use it for. We'll let you discuss that amongst yourselves. Right now, it's time for us to take a break and listen to our Chinese teacher.
接下来，我们一起看到后面的第二段。请同学看到第二段的第二个句子 ：The slimy species of algae。这里所指的是这种黏糊糊的藻类。大家知道它的名字，称这种藻类为盐鼻涕。虽然恶心，但是很贴切。这样的生物会破坏它所侵入的生态系统。请同学特别注意到，这里 disrupt 这个动词，它才是主要的动词。中间呢，其实是插入句。which 在后面的 which disrupts ecosystems to which it is introduced。这里的 which 所指的呢，就是前面的 ecosystems 生态系。再来，请同学看到第三个句子 However, because scientists called it early 这个句子，请同学特别注意到主要子句从 The rock snot was contained 开始，请把 contain 这个动词画起来。contain 一般而言，同学知道的应该是包含的意思，但是 contain 在这里其实指的是防止、遏制，以降低损害的意思。比方说 The government is doing everything it can to contain the spread of the virus。 在武汉肺炎盛行的期间，政府非常的努力，想尽一切办法，就是要防止病毒的蔓延 contain the spread of the virus。 再来，请同学看到同一个句子里面的 wide-ranging。 wide-ranging 指的呢，就是大范围的、大规模的。好，再来，请同学看到第三段，的第三个句子 While vendors may not have wished to answer questions。 这里呢，所指的是在香港大学，他们做了一个研究，他们到海鲜市场采集了一些环境 DNA， 而那边的这些摊贩、商人，他们当然有时候不想要老实的回答问题，主要呢是要避免受罚。所以我们这里 may not have wished to 其实是一种对过去可能性的猜测，他们可能不想要回答执法单位的问题。Vendors may not have wished to answer， 他们之前可能不会想要老老实实的回答。好，再来，请看到第四段的最后一个句子 Even better， 更好的是，这是一个转衔词。我们在连接句子的时候呢，常常会使用到更好的是、更棒的是，就是 even better。 以上是我们针对这篇新闻英文所做的中文讲解，谢谢大家。
That's it for today, everybody. Thank you for joining us, and that's our news digest for this issue of our magazine. And hopefully you learned a little bit about eDNA. From all of us here at English Digest, my name is Tom.
I'm Stephanie.
Goodbye.
Bye.